Welcome to this auction review of December lots that we do on a regular basis. The last one we did was in October, and now we're back with our usual crew. So we've got Rod Turner from Income Through Property and Rodcast as well. Ranjan Bhattacharya from Succeeding Property, and Jay and myself from Hamlet Auctions. So welcome, guys.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good. It's been a while since we've done this, 6-7 weeks approximately. Yep. We basically, all of us picked 2 lots, so we're gonna review 8 lots in total. There'll be 4 lots in this video, and then 4 lots in the next video that will be released. And those are super exciting lots. We've got some nice commercial issues, we've got some nice legal issues, we've got nice tenancy issues, all sorts of issues. So I think this is perfect for our auction review. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with a few lots. This is lot number 1. So Ranjan, this is your lot. So do you want to just walk through what this says, and for the Rodcast users and our users?
Now here is if you're into commercial property, this I think is as juicy as it gets. I mean, there are 2 things that you want to look at when you're looking at commercial property. You want to make, particularly now, of course, you want to make sure that you've got a good covenant in there and the tenant is paying their rent. And this is a tire and exhaust type of place, let to Quick Fit. It's let for a 15-year lease, no break clauses, full repairing, insuring lease. So they are in there paying rent. And the great thing is that during lockdowns, of course, tire and exhaust centres are deemed an essential service. So these sort of places are open. Now, the other thing, there are several of these Quick Fits sites actually in this Allsops catalogue. But this is my pick, and I'll tell you why. Because it's slap bang in the middle of a residential area. A lot of the others on sale in the catalogue are let to Quick Fit, 15-year, no break clause leases. The leases are all the same, but they're in the middle of industrial estates or business parks. This is slap bang in an area which is, close to Stansted Airport, lots of residential in the immediate surrounding area. So you've got that backstop. So first of all, you've got a great tenant that's in business, that's paying rent, producing a reasonable yield. It's steady income. Ideally suit a pension type investor who just wants a good, stable return on their money. And it's got the backstop of when and if Quick Fit want to pack up, it is a no-brainer for residential redevelopment because it's slap bang in a residential area.
What lot number is this, Ranjan?
This lot is number 3. Also commercial. I'm just surprised that this property is like the guide price is at 4.7% of the 4.7% yield. That seems super low for an auction property.
Ranjan, you mentioned because I noticed earlier that there, like you say, there's a few of these going. Who is selling these, and why are they selling? Do you know who's actually selling? Is not under any sort of repossession? I'm guessing, as you said, it's all been paying.
So I haven't actually looked into who the seller is, to be honest with you. But there are a lot of people who, it seems that these leases are relatively new. So it seems that someone owns these things and they've negotiated a whole bunch of brand new leases and looking to sell them on. Because when you negotiate the new leases, of course, you add immediate value to the proposition.
On Piotr's point just about super low yields, I think you're right, but I also think at the moment there is a huge kind of scramble for any yield whatsoever. And even if you've got sort of a 4% yield, yes, it might seem low, but when you look at it against the security of the income that's coming in, actually there's a lot of demand for yield at the moment, which is secure. So if you're, looking at other types of these sorts of risk profile investments, actually it's still good. If you've got a 4% yielding asset with potential uplift down the road, it's still a solid investment when you look at what are the comparables you might have across different asset classes. So
yes, I mean, it's a pick for me because many of these sort of safe yielding investments don't have the alternative redevelopment potential, whereas this one does. Yes, you have to wait 15 years to realize it, but it's still a nice little pot at the end of the rainbow.
Well, do you have to wait 15 years? Because I noticed there's an option to extend, and it said something about that. What's the scenario with
the
that?
tenant has got the right to extend for another 10 years twice.
Okay. So that's quite good. Obviously, it's going to keep doing that, and you've got that fallback position, I suppose, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, like, I always like to see what the values of properties in the local area, and I can see 3-bed semi-detached 229, 230 for another semi.
Well, I think if you were doing it would be a new build, so you'd be probably looking realistically around 300 mark, and you'd probably be getting at least 3 of them in that space, I would have thought.
Yes, I would say so, or even block of flats, possibly.
Exactly, it's most likely to be a block of flats.
So what do we do?
Yeah, I think if you went houses there, there'd be a lack of amenities, so lack of gardens, etc. May not get the premium.
I think I was just talking about on the street. You get 2 on there and then 1 at the back, I would have thought.
Yeah, quite possibly. Okay.
But I think it'll go for a bit more than that. I wouldn't be surprised if this actually went for a yield of very high 3s.
And so the covenant is quick fit, and I would just want to check this, but obviously with some of these big sort of companies, you just want to make sure, is it a subsidiary that is just a one-off SPV and is called Quick Fit Great Britain Limited, whereas actually the big company is...
Well, yeah. I think that this is...
Who's guaranteeing the income, and who's
That's a very good... But just scroll down a little bit on that page.
It does the due diligence on the company, yeah.
I guarantee from Quick Fit GB Limited. So you just want to double check that is who we think it is. I'm sure it is.
Basically, whoever's on the hook for the rent, whether they are they may have it in an SPV, that's fine, as long as they're guaranteeing it through the main entity. Yeah. And then you're looking at the turnover and profits of that entity. They just need to be massive in relation to the rent on that particular unit. And then it's got some meat, basically.
Yeah, brilliant. And Dave is asking a question, one of our members of the Buyers Club. Question to you, Ranjan. How would you look to get your cash out of this one once purchased?
This is not that sort of investment. I think the thing with particularly commercial property auctions is there's several different types of buyers. There are some people that are looking for wealth creation, meaning add value quickly and pull your money out. There are many people that are looking at wealth preservation, particularly now as there's talk about negative interest rates. The government have pumped in so much money into the economy. So if you've got 500 grand and you want to protect it, you can't get that sort of return anywhere else that's guaranteed for 5 years, for 15 years. So there are different types of auction buyers for different types of properties. So this is not a add value, putting your money out and go again type of deal. This is someone with a lot of cash or a pension looking to preserve that.
It's more mature strategy rather than a entrepreneurial type purchase.
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Ranjan. Well, that was a good question from Safe. So the second lot, any more questions on that lot? And by the way, Ranjan's saying high 3s. I don't think it will reach 500. and I'm happy to place a bet if anyone is in the game.
Oh, Piotr's got his wallet out. Here's another 20.
Well,
I mean,
the other thing we're kind of forgetting is we're talking about this happening in, I don't know, 15 years. The other option is to strike an agreement with the tenant as well. So you'd want to have a real close look over that lease. And also there may be someone who's linked with that tenant. You could even have the tenant looking to buy that to redevelop it themselves. I think there's different options. It doesn't need to be that you got to wait and sit there. It could be that you can pay the tenant to leave, or even do it on an option or an equity basis of any uplift in value for them. There's lots of different routes down that.
It's highly unlikely. I'll tell you what. I mean, we've got a tyre and exhaust centre in near Gatwick Airport, actually. And during this COVID time, we've actually negotiated a rent increase, a rent review, and negotiated a rent increase. The reason why is that actually these tyre and exhaust centres in residential areas are like gold dust.
Really?
Once they're there, I mean, it's virtually impossible to get planning to build one of these in a residential area.
Mm-hmm.
So when they've got a site like this, they love it. So they will be there and they'll pay the market rent, which is a good income stream.
What is the planning use class of that? Is it sui generis?
That would be sui generis for sure. Yeah,
it's something like that, but it's quite hard to get. So that's why when they want to kind of, if they did want to pack up, particularly the smaller independents, there's no shortage of people wanting tenants coming to who are interested in occupying those premises.
And the rent on this one isn't that high. 22,000 isn't a massive amount.
Well, again, it's looking at the lease to see if there's when the rent reviews are and how those can be negotiated.
This is CPI linked, I think.
Yeah, it's a
nice.
fairly new lease that's just been signed in March, at the start of COVID, really, and it's CPI linked.
And that actually presents that's advantageous for a lot of investors, because rent reviews can be a little bit of a pain if you're a passive commercial investor, because you've got to know a little bit about the process. You've got to appoint a commercial surveyor and you have to go through a bit of a process. Whereas with CPI linked, you just know where you are.
Yeah, that's right. Good. Okay. Well, any guesses on what it's going to go for? Ranjan said high threes. I'm saying no more than 500.
Yeah, I think you'll get about 450. Because someone with a SIP will look at that and just go.
450 will be below the reserve.
What is the reserve?
It's a range guide, so the reserve has to be within that range.
Yeah, 475 to 465, 475. So.
Yeah, I think that's about right for it.
Yeah, I think it's not going to sell for much more than that. 500 is the limit, I would say. Jay?
Yeah, I'm in the same camp.
499.
Sorry, Ranjan. I'm in the same camp. I think this may land on like even 470 on the dot. I think it's good, and I think Rod's absolutely correct. Someone in that kind of with that kind of background, SAS or SIP, will look at that thinking, wait, I get 15 years, no breaks, CPI linked, with the potential to get another 20 years. I can sit on this until I'm 105 or whatever, and not really have to worry about it. So, I think the value is limited in that respect. I don't think it's as exotic as some of the other things that we've looked at, but I think in that range is good value for a SIP purchaser.
Yeah.
And like Ranjan said, it's different. It's horses for courses. Like, people look at this and might think, well, if my pension's in a stocks and shares equity, why would I want to put my pension in this? Well, it's all about the risk profile. And actually, when you are 30 years old compared to when you're 60, your risk profile is going to be very different in terms of what you're looking for in that investment, in terms of risk and energy that you've got to put into it. So I do think a lot of people don't understand that when they're starting in investment and trying to pull money out and get huge returns on investment. Actually, the risk and effort factor is huge, especially kind of the older you get and the more reliant you are on preserving that wealth, but also on income and the reliability of that income.
Absolutely. And this is, I mean, as you pointed out, these leases with Quick Fit are all new. So it's a classic strategy for the people who are looking to do something entrepreneurial. Basically, get it cash flowing, get a decent covenant in, get a long lease signed, and then you've added the value, then sell it on. And let it be picked up by someone who has a SIP or a SAS.
And just digged out some information on the company's house on the seller, basically, of those properties. This is the London Metric Retail Limited. And they've got quite a big portion of this is a business review and principal activities. And it says over here that they acquired, they made following arm's length investments since 31st of March 2020, a portfolio of further 5 Quick Fits. 3rd of June. So it looks like they purchased Quick Fits and now they're selling some of them. And maybe they purchased them for sort of fairly good prices. But it's quite a substantial company with big stores, service stations with co-op and non-co-op. And
Waitrose convenience stores, 62 million, 52 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does look like they had a loss of 5.2 million last year. So
but again, this is not who who the tenant is. This is just the seller.
No.
So
not
really,
the seller, yeah. That's right, yeah. But there's some interesting information on the company's house, and it's always worthwhile in investigating who the seller is and what their position is, because that might reveal more properties they own and they might want to sell as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move to the next property. So this is a site. This is a site in Tidworth, and it's a lot number 1, and also there's lot number 2, which is quite similar in Hampshire. And basically, the reason why I picked those lots, these are my lots, is to discuss some things with you guys and hear your opinions on certain things. So this is lot number 1 in also residential garages at Beach Hill Road, Hampshire, Tidworth. The guide price for this property is £35,000, and the similar site in Stockbridge, Hampshire, it's guided at £14,500 plus. And those sites are occupied by garages, 5 lock-up garages for the lot 2 and 17 garages for lot number 1. And what's interesting about this is that this is the garages are vacant. They're being sold by housing associations, both of them. And there's quite a lot of lots that are being sold by housing associations these days in auctions. So question to you is, do you think there's value in lots like this? Do you think that, and why do you think housing associations are selling stock like that in auctions?
I think for the same reason that housing associations sell any stock, because they're more trouble for them and they don't have the time and resources to fix them up and do what's needed to get them back to be fit for purpose, like a lot of housing. I actually think those are quite interesting lots, because one, I'd want to know a few things first, like the income that garages are getting, if any, at the moment, what the standard rent would be if you did nothing to them. Also, I'd want to know what the structure is, because you may be looking at some land remediation relief with asbestos on a lot of those garages. And then it's looking at pound per square foot values of different use classes. Obviously, you want to get residential on those. You can see just from those maps that the plots are big around there for the houses. They're big plots, so it's unlikely you're going to get a block of 15 flats on that. It's more likely you might get one house, just looking at the plot sizes again there. So it's looking at what your values are going to be on that, and also looking at if it is garages and storage, what happens if you just keep it as garages and storage and just get them fit for purpose, and maybe do a similar model to what the sellers of the last lot are doing and get some income and then sell it on. But I think there's always opportunity in these. It just depends on the specifics, really.
Yeah, but it's like the case study from our auction review in June.
Just show up the picture again. It's
that's not this one. That would be this one.
I mean, I think this is an interesting proposition. The housing associations probably don't feel it's in their remit to look after car storage spaces for their sort of tenants. So for the reasons Rod says, they're sort of flogging it. They may have asbestos in, and it's not in their remit also to rent out those individual garage units. What I would be, I mean, this is not an area I know too much about, but they're not exactly valuable buildings. They're all prefab garage units. And we need to check, of course, that they're generally dry. Otherwise, no one's going to rent them as storage unless they are sort of structurally dry and all the rest of it. But the other thing is, looking at the density of housing on that little map there, I'm just wondering what the demand would be in an area where there are lots of houses where they have their own garages and people may not be short of storage. I get the demand in more highly densely populated areas for storage units, but I'm not sure in these sort of areas. But typically garages do go for sort of £60-70 a month in suburban areas. So that would be the income, but you'd have to upgrade the security. I think a big issue for people renting garages is how secure is the site. So you'd have to put in some CCTV, some flood lighting and all of this sort of stuff in there as well.
I think I quite like this, in terms of redevelopment, I think I prefer the second one to the first one, just in terms of kind of its size and because it's a bit wider, and that might be a bit easier to get a house on there in that plot rather than the first one, which is quite narrow. I'm not sure.
And probably would have less if you build a house like at the back here. It would have, or even here, it would have less issues.
Have you done a? Have you got a street view? I mean, what sort of house is right next door? That number 3.
They look like ex-council semi-detached type things.
Oh, are they? Okay.
So
no. Yeah.
Oh, very nice and spacious.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. It feels very spacious.
The reason I asked you to display that is I just wanted to see the house type to kind of gauge whether it's likely that the person with the house next door is likely to really want that to extend their plot size. It doesn't look like they would.
And I wonder if it's it is a house. It's 2 semis. Yeah, quite unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the gardens, a lot of the gardens are coming off to the side as well. You could potentially, at a real push, get 2 semis in there maybe, with the garden coming off to the back and the rear. But I think it's more likely you're looking at 1.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting, and we found it quite, I would say, surprising that Allsops would put those lots, lot number 1 and 2.
Well, it's in the residential, isn't it? I wonder if there's any. I'd be looking on the planning portal to see if any planning has actually gone in for those sites in the past. Again, if it's housing association, the chances are not, because they're not bothered about it. But I just wonder whether, again, you wouldn't be able to buy it off an option with the housing association. Well, most of them will have to be seen to be selling it at auction. So again, it's unlikely that anything's gone in there. So it could be. It's a bit like an untapped opportunity, really. I think so. There can be some good.
It's a low cost of entry as well, right? I mean, we're not talking about a couple of 100,000 here. There's you could probably argue for the lot 1 where there's 15-ish, or definitely double figure looking garages there. You know, what's the capital value if you were to just sell those off to the neighbouring people, or sell some, rent some? If you could sell half and rent half, then you could probably sell your way out of your purchase price, and then the rest is just residual income. Unless you were really looking at the development value of it. which, especially for the first one, feels quite limited.
If you were to let those garages for £60 a month, 17 garages, that would be almost 11.5k a year income.
I forget what the I'm sure there were some PD rights for garages at some stage, weren't there? Ranjan, you'll probably know this, but I think they've gone as
yeah.
Am I right thinking that there were some PD rights to extend previously? I just wonder if there's any angle on that you could do and use that as a fallback to then go in for planning.
I'm not sure. I really am not
These
sure.
are also sui generis.
Okay.
That's another thing with them.
I think, as you've rightly said, this is not something that the Housing Association has really tried to do anything with. So this is really sort of virgin ground. And I also think that a lot of the time the auctioneers do manage to get public bodies to agree to relatively low reserves. And I think they've positioned these 1 and 2 in the catalogue because they want to generate a lot of interest, a lot of hoo-ha, and they want to set the tone for the auction because they know that these are going to go well in excess of guide because someone is going to see the redevelopment potential of those plots. So I think they've got the Housing Association to agree a relatively low reserve, position them at 1 and 2 in the catalogue to set the mood and tone for the whole auction by having that hypey sale right in the beginning. Because for redevelopment, it looks from the pictures, it looks as though you will get semis, you will get some houses on there. It's not going to be a big deal. There's already development on that site, and you could do something that's in keeping with the area, not a block of flats, just repeat semis. And it's too cheap. It's too cheap as a land plot if you're going to produce a few semis.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, let's see how they're going to perform, how they're going to set the tone for the rest of the also Brezi auction. Let's move to the next one. This nice little thing. It's your Jace, right?
Yeah, I like this one. We've already been down to take a look at this. It's a nice performing high street. This is lot number 96 at the McHugh Co auction. It is 86 High Street, Dorking in Surrey. It's a mid-terrace 2-storey building, and it is producing £16,000 per annum off a guide price of £95,000.
And there's a rent-free period for 6 months. It's a new lease, and the rent-free period is from 1st of October until 6 months will be April, 1st of April.
Yeah.
And it's a 15-year lease to an individual named Tariq Mohammed. And the tenant has paid £4,000 plus VAT deposit.
I would, I mean, on the face of it, the yield's fantastic, isn't it? But you just want to know a little bit more about Tariq and is he a homeowner? Is he guaranteeing that income with something substantial behind him in terms of wealth? Because you want to make sure, like anything, that you have a good chance of getting that agreed income. So that would be the first thing. But yeah, it seems good. It's just having it's going through that lease with a fine-tooth comb, isn't it? Just to see if there's any surprises, see if there's any breaks.
Yeah.
Putting down £4,000 at the front is good.
Are you renting the whole premises at 16 grand?
Yes, the whole thing, first and second floor.
Is this subject to VAT? Because one thing inconsistent, it doesn't actually say whether whether this is a VAT registered property. It does say that the tenant has paid £4,000 plus VAT deposit.
Yeah.
What I tend to find with commercial property is that a lot of commercial property is VAT registered. When the rents are 35 grand plus a year, it doesn't make two hoots of difference because the businesses that will be renting those are VAT registered and they claim it back. When you get to the sub 20k rents if the property is VAT registered and the tenant is not VAT registered, then that adds 20% to their rent bill, which often makes it unattractive as a rental proposition for some people. So I wanted to explore whether it's a VAT registered property, because it says he's paid £4,000 plus VAT deposit, which normally is paid if it's VAT registered.
And the way McHugh described the commercial lots is not the same way. It's also commercial Acutus approaches it. On those also commercial Acutus catalogs, like students can learn how to really describe an auction lot or a commercial property. And McHugh is just like that, like gave basic facts about the property, and they're fairly inconsistent. So I'm just trying to look in their special conditions what it says about the VAT, but I can't see anything really.
I mean, that's because McHugh Co is by and large a residential auctioneer, so they don't really.
Yeah.
They just don't have it in their procedures properly.
What would be your angle on this? Would it literally just be to buy, rent out, and collect the income? Or is there...
Yeah, so we actually looked at what's happening in Dorking and so Dorking is a fairly affluent area. That is number one. And we looked at what's available on that high street, and there's a lot of really good shops on that high street and not many available properties. So whatever comes up usually rents out fairly well. In terms of rents, this isn't an outrageous rent. This is a fairly in line with everything else that's basically renting in Dorking. And this property could suit like a hairdresser. It could have different uses than the gallery. And because the lease has just been signed, obviously there's a 6 months rent-free period, but it's been signed in that COVID time. So I don't think anyone taking on that lease would have, not planned for what's happening right now. So that kind of gives me a bit more confidence. And if we buy this, anything less than say 150, I think it's a good purchase. And then we're gonna see basically what's gonna happen.
So let's say Tariq Mohammed doesn't perform and realizes it's not for him and walks away from it, and you can't pursue him for that rent or income. What then would you be wanting to do? Would you be repurposing it, like you said, to a hairdresser? How are you going to attract tenants to this based on what's going on in Dorking and any other commercial? Because it seems the rent seems quite, I don't know what the size of the unit is and things like that, but is there not some empty properties around there that could be cheaper
No, we checked the Rightmove residential and also Rightmove commercial and other commercial portals for available rental properties, and none of them are sort of anywhere close to this. And even pounds per square foot, it works out fairly well. One thing I want to show you guys is the business rates valuation, because that shows the areas and also gives a good overview. What number was that? 86. Just give me a moment. 86. So let's say this valuation. We does not have information. Okay, so there is basically an internal storage of 43 square meters on the first floor, and then there is the whole property's got 90 square meters, so about 1,000 square feet. So if we're buying this at 150, that's 150 pounds per square foot, really, which works out fairly well. And the rateable, so not the rate, the value of the property is rateable value is 19,754, which is below the rental that's currently agreed, which kind of gives us fairly high confidence that we would be able to relet this unit or create something creative in there, because there are 2 floors. I'm not sure. Can we access the first floor from the rear, Jay?
I think there was access to the rear, but I don't know if there was access created to access the first floor from the rear.
Yeah, so possibly if there's a way of us getting access to the first floor and then creating maybe a residential unit there, that
Well,
would be.
There was another thing that concerned me. I mean, obviously the VAT issue, low rental VAT properties are difficult to let. But the other issue is it's not freehold; it's a long leasehold. So we've got to find out who the freeholder is and whether they'll be amenable to giving permission. Because there's another open goal there. It looks as though it could have sustain an extra floor, but we don't have the freehold with this.
Yeah.
And it's what the freeholder will ask for their ransom to comply with that request to make the upper floor residential.
Yeah, that's right. That is a good point. And I guess sometimes we have to find who the freeholder is. I haven't checked, but sometimes
It's not saying they'll disagree. It's just finding it out and sizing it up.
Yeah.
Beforehand.
Also, you want to know kind of the pound per square foot of residential in that area, because I think if you can go up 1 floor, I think you can probably go up 2 floors there, just based on what's on the left-hand side of that property. But yeah, it'll be interesting. And with 40 square meters or just over 40 square meters on that floor, you'd get that again on the second floor. So potentially you could be looking, depending on where you put staircases and things like that, you might just be able to squeeze in an extra unit, or it might be just a extension of that. You could be converting that to residential in the long run if the lease doesn't work out.
Yeah, we'll have to do a little bit of digging of who is the freeholder of that property, but those are some good points.
Sorry to bang on about the VAT, just to let people know, if you do buy a VAT registered property, and this is registered for VAT, that means you have to pay 20% VAT on the hammer price.
Yeah.
You can claim it back against your next VAT return, but you would have to pay that, which is a cash flow hit, unless you went out and got a VAT exemption certificate that allows you to buy it as a going concern.
Yeah.
Which is a TOGC, right?
Yeah. Or you can ask the seller to delist it for VAT beforehand. But as it's an auction, it's unlikely that.
Yeah. Aren't there some rules? I've never done that before, but there's some rules, aren't they, about
there's
21 years and all of this?
Lots of complex rules about when it was opted in for that, and if it was done. Don't quote me on this because it won't be correct, but it's something like, if it's done in the last 20 years, you can't opt it out of that.
Something like that. It's very difficult.
Yeah. You don't want to get into the intricacies of that. But yeah, you can make it work well for you and create opportunities, but you do not need to know what you're doing, and definitely recommend speaking to a VAT specialist on that sort of stuff.
Brilliant. Okay, well let's move to the 4th lot, and the 4th lot is Rod's property. Rod, do you want to introduce this?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Auction House London. It's lot 63?
63, yes.
And the address is 68 to 76 Central Drive in Blackpool. So what is this? It is a mixed-use building with some commercial on the ground floor, and then I think another 3 floors of residential on the top. It was previously, I think, a 25-room HMO on the upper floors, and ground floor looks like it hasn't been occupied. None of that commercial's been occupied for a while. It caught my eye because it's a big space, and I think there's a few traps here to just be aware of. You're looking at Blackpool. It's an area where there is a lot of investment going in there now, but that investment hasn't yet resulted in increased prices and rents yet. Although many people think that's coming. What this is it's got planning to convert to, I think it's 16 flats. So get rid of the commercial that's clearly not in demand. 13 flats, sorry. Yeah. That's 10 2-beds and 3 1-beds. So getting rid of the commercial, converting that into residential. Now, there's a few things to point out here. The capital values of these of this area for residential is around 120 to 150 pound per square foot. Now that is very, very low. Okay, so if you're looking at this and thinking, right, I'm going to purchase this, convert it and sell it at a profit, unless you are building extremely cheap, you are not going to come out of that very well.
Unless you're getting paid to purchase it.
Yeah, especially if you're paying money to purchase the price. Yeah. The good things about the build are it's already existing residential upstairs. It's got no new build in the planning application, so it's just converting the existing building. It's pulling down a small part of it. The costs where it's going to eat up will be in things like soundproofing and utilities. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, where it starts to get a little bit more interesting is where you start looking at rents, okay? If you're looking at private rentals in that area, things that are on the market are about $350 for 1-beds and $400 for 2-beds. Now, what's interesting is the LHA rates are actually higher than that. So in April, the LHA rates were increased, and in that area, they're increased quite substantially. So if you're renting to LHA, I think you're looking at £364 a week for a 1-bed and $494 for a 2-bed. So it's a bit more for LHA rates. Now, this kind of opens up a few opportunities where you could be looking at getting it on renting it back to an organisation. Doesn't necessarily need to be just individual LHA tenants. It could be a fixed term for a housing provider, a social housing provider, anything like that. The problem you've got, or that I have, when you have low value rents and low value properties, and you're looking at this as a rental kind of income play for the future, is it sounds good on paper, but over time, the operational costs as a percentage of the income really do start to whack up. So your maintenance, your voids, your arrears, your management fees start to kick in. So in lower value areas, you might be better off going for one of these 7-year fixed terms to a government appointed housing provider, even though the rent might be slightly lower. If you're looking at total returns over time, you might be a bit better on that one. As I said before, building to sell is unlikely to work unless you're selling it as an investment. So again, like lot number 1 we discussed, is what you're doing is you're getting it income producing, and then you're selling that on to a small fund, a family office, a individual who just wants some income, because you're looking at, if say you've got, I don't know, roughly 1,000 square meters of property here to convert, best will in the world, it's going to cost you, I don't know, 400 or 500 grand to convert all that. Now, where it's going to benefit someone and where people will make money from this is people that know the area and understand what grants are available. Now, this is quite an interesting topic on its own, but in a lot of these low value areas, you can get quite substantial grants to convert disused properties, okay, into residential, as long as you will pre-sign a lease either back to the council or back to one of their organisations. So this is where I see there being a good opportunity, is if you can organise those grants for the build. It's not going to give you the money for the entire build, but it certainly will make it more worthwhile in terms of the high ticket cost number of some of those parts of the build. So that's what I think it will work well for. more problems you'll have with it is finance. Okay, so finding a lender that is willing to lend once it's built to a value that is going to be either the same or more than the money that's gone into it. Notice how I said the money that's gone into it. If you've got a grant, it's still money that's gone into it. It might not be your money. So again, that's something to look at as well. So I think that's the play here. It's looking at converting this. It's either going to be a builder or someone in the area who has links with housing providers, and more importantly, has links to the grants available to that, organising that lease with that, organising the grants to do it, and getting it back. And then it's a nice income play because the yield on it is going to be strong. You're looking at kind of double figures there. But as I said before, if you want it as individual tenancies, the net return won't be nearly as juicy as it is on paper because of all those operational expenses. So I would be looking at getting a longer lease built in there to one of the providers, so I can kind of set and forget for a while, and then come back to it down the line with a bit of hope that that investment that is pouring in from various sources into Blackpool has increased capital values by that time. So yeah, that is what I would be looking at, but certainly a lot of traps in there.
Can we have a look at the picture of the property again?
Yeah. Sure?
The picture of the property. I mean, viewers of my YouTube will know that my views on Blackpool and low value areas.
Yeah.
You're getting a nice chunk of property, but for 230, I'd be expecting the whole street in that area. I think one of the big issues with low value areas like Blackpool, as Rod has pointed out, is the build cost. It's going to be very difficult to get a handle on that and keep that down. And when you do anything with an old building, they're unknowns. And the great thing, and I've done loads of these sort of old buildings in high value areas, and you can't see everything. You go in and then you find some, rotten joists in the roof and this and that asbestos somewhere, or some floor joists that are completely damaged, and you've got woodworm, and there's some things that you can't look at. But in high value areas, there's enough in the deal, there's enough in the cake for you to make those repairs. My viewpoint is that if I was to build 13 or 14 flats in a low value area, I'd want to do it from the ground up, because once you've got your foundations and you're up to DPC, all your costs are predictable and certain. There's just too much in here that can go wrong in the build cost to put you into negative territory.
Don't disagree with any of that. Yeah. Things I'll be wanting to look at are things like the windows, the roof. I mean, because you're not doing anything really structural here, you're putting in a couple of velux to the existing roof, no new windows, you're not putting any new space in. So like Ranjan's rightly said, when you are converting something, you're ripping things off, and there's always going to be some surprises, and obviously surprises in this instance mean cost. And I think this is why, if you're looking at this to convert and you're not able to attract grant money for it, it's going to be a bit of a dud, I think. So you would need to be doing that. And even if you're a builder and you've got really cheap build costs, even looking at, let's say it's 1,000 square meters and it's 200 grand to purchase, I mean, that's still a substantial amount of capital value per square meter plus the build cost. And we've already said the capital values of flats in the area are about 150 per square meter. So you're really, sorry, 150 per square foot. You really are going to struggle to actually make any money on that. And people might go, yeah, I'm looking at the income. Well, that's all well and good, but if you're financing it, you'll find that actually you're having to pour in more equity when it comes to refinance. So there's certainly a lot of traps in there, but I think what it will work for is someone who has good links with the council and specialist housing providers, and also have access to grants in that area for regeneration. And that's really the only way I can see increasing the capital value, or getting return on that capital investment, as well as getting decent income from that and a decent yield.
Got a question from Saif. He's asking specifically you, Rod. How would you look at securing the lease with a housing association or council prior to bidding at the auction, as he sees that as the biggest risk, really?
Absolutely.
The time it takes, sometimes it can make it auction an unfavorable place, right?
Absolutely. I think that's, he's hit the nail on the head, and it's about, a lot of these things are about getting your ducks in a row before you come to exchange and completion, and that's where auctions are not great if you're a buyer, because you have very little time to get your ducks in a row. But it's taking a punt, isn't it? And I think
there's, especially if the price of this property is reflective of those risks that you're taking on.
Well, I don't know if it is. I think it's quite highly priced. So I would be a bit concerned about that. I'd definitely be on the phone to the council straight away, onto the phone to their housing team, looking at different providers in that area and researching what grants are available, and also looking at demand from some of those specialist housing providers. Because another problem you've got with places like Blackpool is the supply and demand issue. There is a lot of supply, and demand is only coming from a few different sources. And so you need to look at if the demand is actually there. And I think that's something that's quite important, because you get plenty of buyers from outside the area thinking, oh God, this is cheap, yeah, this will go. But actually, when you come to look at the demand for that, often it's very different in different areas. So you do need to be quite careful on that.
And I think a clue of what you're saying is auction house have franchises up and down the country, but this is a Blackpool lot positioned in auction house London sale.
Yeah.
And that is telling. Why isn't it in Manchester or one of the local ones?
That is simple. It's because if it's listed in a London auction house or a national auction house, it will be seen by local people,
right,
but also will be exposed to people in London. So I think for that reason, sometimes if something is listed in Manchester, none of us will see it. It won't make it into the show. But then if it's in London auction and somewhere else, we'll be able to see it, as well as local people will be able to see it. Because
but that's my point, is to push up the price and probably attract someone who doesn't know the area that well and doesn't understand the supply demand issues that Rod alluded to. And the other thing that I think a lot of London investors don't realize is the planning premium. A premium for having planning permission is worth something in high value areas, because high value areas, councils tend to be a pain in the ass. In low value areas, and Blackpool is an area where the population is decreasing, the planners are all over you to what they want people to develop. So it's actually easier to get planning permission for things because they know that it's not often uneconomic to develop these things out. So there isn't really much premium attached, in my view, for that planning permission in Blackpool, as opposed to someone in a high value area selling a site with planning permission for 13 flats.
I think this lot is going to go to one of the private social housing companies who are for-profit housing associations who already have access to these types of grants there, and also for the long leases and income security, and they will just get it because they know the end goal. It's a bit like forward funding on a development, and they already have that in place, and they'll be able to utilise that. I think they're going to be the best kind of buyers for this. For anyone else, it's going to be too tricky to get you, well, possibly too tricky to get your ducks in a row beforehand, and a risk that I'm not sure is worth taking. But it's interesting lot. So I thought it's good to discuss some of those traps.
Those kind of properties are very, very difficult to value, right? And in some situations, a difficult to value property is good for you. But in something like this, I think actually you finding it difficult to value is going to make it even harder for development finance and or exit finance to kind of value your end product as well, which makes, it limits your opportunities.
Absolutely. And that's kind of why I mentioned finance being a trap there, is look, if you're buying it in cash and you're concerned about income, then actually it's a much safer play because the income is high compared to the cash that's going into it. But when you then start looking at actually what the capital values are in the area and how it would be valued by a lender, everything changes. And you might find actually you're having to put more money in where you thought you weren't. If you're getting I'd be very concerned about getting development finance on something like this, because you really could fall into a trap where you can't pay it back. I want to make sure I've got cash there ready to pay off any development finance if that's the route you want to choose, or I'd be looking to buy in cash and then pay it off once I've refinanced, because you are taking a bit of a gamble on that, like I said, unless you've got those existing relationships and you understand how the funding will work for those special kind of leases.
I think
that last option sounds most useful. Sorry.
I think the only way to get this lot priced well is to offer it with a reserve of £1 and let people decide what it's worth. That's my view on this. And
guerrilla marketing from Piotr Rusinek.
I think it will go though, because I think people like to do projects, and especially people from out of that area like to do projects and may think, well, I can build cheap and do those things. And
maybe they already have relationships with those local housing providers, and they think if I build it, they will come. Some people do have that mentality.
Yeah, absolutely.
I smell money. Are you up for £20 bet, lot? I'm saying it once.
Well, you're saying it won't sell, and I'm saying it will sell.
Well, I'm up for a £20 bid.
Bet.
Oh wow! Cue the hate mail from the local area. Cue the hate mail from the local area to Ranjan. Oh, wow.
Ranjan needs a bodyguard when he goes into Blackpool.
Okay, cool.
So is that
yes, a lot?
Sorry?
At £20 on the...
I'll bet you £20 that it will sell at auction.
Okay, I'm saying you won't sell. Cool, £20 on.
Okay.
You might find I've bought it if it hasn't.
For the sake of saving face and not losing 20 quid, he'll dive into this one.
Okay, nice one. Well, I think we did spend way too much time on a property like this, but we discussed really good topics. So